Hello Year 11 and welcome to your half-term homework for English. In this PowerPoint, which accompanies the resource that you were given in the PPE launch assembly, I'm going to explain what you're expected to do, how that's going to help you prepare for your upcoming PPE exams, and the specifics of the tasks themselves. Okay, just to outline, you've got a couple of tasks for literature and one task for language that we are, as a minimum, recommending you do. So for literature, there is a Macbeth practice question and there is a Christmas Carol practice question. Those are the two texts that are going to come up in your literature paper 1. And then there is a language paper 1 question, specifically the question 5, creative writing. So that is in the second mock, the English language mock. So both of those will help you do a really good thorough practice for not all of the questions, but most of the important questions that are going to come up in your mocks. Okay, all of this information, just to flag up, is also on the English Instagram account. If you have not joined up yet, please do so. Scan the QR code, which will take you to the account. There's lots of really good practical ways to revise on there, so I'd really recommend, if you haven't already, signing up for that. So the first piece of homework that I'm going to talk about is your literature homework. So for literature, you need to plan an essay for both Macbeth and A Christmas Carol using the past paper questions on the next 2 slides. So the first thing you should do now is to think about your plan. If you're struggling on how to plan, the Instagram page has resources for both of the questions coming up. So look at the Instagram and refer to the question to see what you could include if you're struggling for content. But the plan should firstly focus on an overall answer to the question, and that should be, what is the writer's key idea about that question focus? What are they trying to tell the reader through the text? You would also need to include key quotes from the extract that you're given and analyse those quotes and think about what you'd say about those quotes. So that should be a key focus of your planning as well. And on top of that, evidence also needs to come from the rest of the text. So 3 or 4 key moments from around the play or the novella that you could use to support the idea and answer the question. Okay, in that list of other events, you should also have key quotes. So this is where you need to have memorized and learned key quotes from other parts of the play to include. And then linking back as well to context, so how life at the time influenced what the writer is writing and the key message that they're trying to get across. That plan could take the form of a mind map, could take the form of notes or a column or a list. However you want to present it, the key thing is that you've got key ideas, links to the extract and links to the rest of the text before you start writing. Okay, so the Macbeth question that we've given you is on the theme of guilt. This is quite a tricky theme, but it is one that's important to understand and to know because it might come up. So guilt means essentially feeling bad or regretting something that you've done in the past. So in the play we should have a fairly clear idea, I think, of who feels guilty and when. Macbeth feels guilty particularly after the murder of Duncan because he's committed regicide and betrayed the king. And Lady Macbeth doesn't feel guilty at that point, but she does later in the play when she's driven insane by her guilt and eventually goes mad and commits suicide. Macbeth goes on the opposite trajectory, and as the play goes on, he feels less guilty, more detached from his actions, as power corrupts him even further. The extract that you've got is directly after the murder of Duncan, where Macbeth is tortured by his guilt and speaks at length about the idea of blood being on his hands and how he can't wash it off. In contrast, to Lady Macbeth, who very famously says, "A little water clears us of this deed." So there's a little hint about one of the key quotes that you'd want to look at. She doesn't feel any guilt or remorse about Duncan's murder. She sees it as insignificant and just wants to cover it up and move on. Okay, so you want to apply the points that I talked about on the last slide to this extract. So mind map ideas about guilt. Where does it come up in the play? What is Shakespeare trying to say about guilt? How it tortures people, how it affects their lives after they've committed a sinful act. And then have a look at the extract, think about 3 or 4 key quotes that you might analyse to support that point, as well as quotes from the rest of the play. Okay. Remember that you've got 50 minutes, roughly speaking, to answer this question. That includes planning time. So once you've done your plan, you should then spend 50 minutes writing your answer. Okay? Even if you do one paragraph in response to the extract, that would be better than just doing a plan and not doing anything with the plan, because the plan is only as good as then what you write about it. So 10 minutes to plan, I'd say, and then the rest of the time, 40, maybe 45 minutes. If you want to give yourself longer, you can, but I wouldn't write for any more than an hour. To help you, the Instagram page has a post on guilt with all of the ideas that you'd want to include in your essay. And there is also a link on this slide to a website where it has, again, detailed notes about the theme of guilt. So use those two to support your planning and then your writing. Okay, so the instructions for A Christmas Carol are very much the same as Macbeth. I'll just explain the question and the extract that you've been given. So this one is about Scrooge's fears, which is very similar in a way to the supernatural, because the extract is focused on the ghost of Christmas yet to come and the description of the ghost. So remember, this ghost is kind of like a reaper-like figure, a symbol of death, and he comes to warn Scrooge about the future and how he needs to change. But the spirit is there also to scare Scrooge, to frighten him into changing. The figure is hooded. We can't see its face, we can only see its hand, and it also doesn't speak. So Scrooge is having in this extract a kind of one-sided conversation almost with himself, and the point of that is that Scrooge himself needs to realise the changes that he needs to make. So the ghost cannot tell him anything, he needs to learn it for himself, or understand it, or see it for himself. So you'd want to focus on the description of the ghost and how that creates fear, but also what's the point of Scrooge's fear. It's there to motivate him to change and to be redeemed. The question is a tricky one again, Scrooge's fears. So we could talk about the fear created by the different ghosts. So Marley's ghost creates the idea that he needs to change and not end up like Marley, that's a fear. You could talk about the ghost of Christmas Present and how Scrooge is maybe frightened of the fact that Tiny Tim, for example, will die if he doesn't do anything, but also particularly of more generally the supernatural and this extract of Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. You may also want to talk about Scrooge's fear of poverty, which is a small part of the novel, but it is mentioned when in Stave 2 he goes back to see his conversation with his ex-fiancée Belle, and the younger Scrooge talks about how poverty is the thing that he fears most. So his avarice, his love of money, and his miserliness are motivated, we see, from this fear of becoming poor, which has kind of influenced his life and influenced his decisions. It's a difficult question, so I'd very much recommend A, looking at the Instagram post, and then B, looking at the model essay which you've got a link to here. This would show a really clear structure, not just for your writing, but also for the kinds of ideas that you'd want to include in your plan. After you've done that, do the same thing, planning and writing, up to an hour in length. Okay, so we're now moving on to the language section, and for the language we just want you to focus on the writing section. Okay, just a reminder that this is worth 40 marks of the 80 that you get for paper 1, so it's half of the marks on one question. So it's really important that you give it a really good go and you know how to plan and answer it, and B, how to write that answer effectively. Okay, so the picture that we've given you is a picture of an alleyway. There are a number of doors going into different houses. It looks slightly run down, possibly impoverished. It also looks to be in a perhaps tropical location. So that's the image that you could choose. And remember, if you're choosing option 1, because there's two options here, option 1 or option 2, in option 1 you need to describe the setting, but you also want to create some tension and drama and to build into the opening of a story. So you need characters, you need an event, one key event to focus on, so don't just describe the picture but build that into a story. You could also choose number 2, option 2, write a story about a life-changing moment. Just a reminder, this second option gives you a much broader scope to write about, because a life-changing moment could be really anything that you wanted it to be within reason. Okay, so do feel free to do that one, but remember that the same planning procedure should apply, which I'm going to go through on the next slide. If you'd like to do both of these, that would be a good way to maybe find out which one you prefer. Do you prefer the image stimulus or do you prefer the prompt? Okay, it's a 45-minute question, so you want to spend 5 to 10 minutes of that time planning, which I'm going to explain how to do now. Okay, so it's really important, firstly, just to emphasize how crucial it is to plan your creative writing question 5 response before you start writing. You don't get any marks for the plan itself, but if you don't plan effectively, it is likely your story won't meet the criteria in terms of creating tension and having a clear structure. Okay, so the structure that we're suggesting is a 5-part structure as outlined below. So your first paragraph is going to be exposition. This is where you set the scene. So if you were describing the picture, you would describe what you can see in the alleyway. You might create some atmosphere around it being a bit run down, a bit impoverished, to kind of give the person a sense of what kind of place it's like. You could also, as suggested, use prophetic fallacy or personification of the weather to create atmosphere in that first paragraph. You then want to introduce a problem. Conflict or tension is created through a problem in your story. So it could be, for example, someone begging on the street if it was a poor area, or someone going door to door looking for something that they've lost, or there could be something more positive. There could be a street party, or there could be a celebration. It doesn't have to be negative. But there needs to be something that's going to create some tension in your story. So that's the second paragraph, introducing your problem. You then have your third paragraph, the rising action. This is where the problem or the conflict becomes more intense, more extreme. We build up and create more tension through something about the scene changing or developing. In your fourth paragraph, you're going to reach the climax, so that would be the highest point of tension, where there is possibly a cliffhanger, where we leave the reader wanting to know more, or something that kind of leads us to the resolution, which is the last paragraph. You may want to do those as kind of the same, because the climax and the resolution might come, at kind of the same point in your story, but the resolution might, for example, repeat the opening or link back to the opening in some way. It might provide a happy ending, it might provide a sad ending, it might provide a cliffhanger. Okay. You also may have had a different plan or different way of planning to this given to you by your teacher, because this is one way, but there may be another way that you're more comfortable with. But what I'd suggest is that you definitely focus on only one event in your story and you only have 1 or 2 characters, so that we can keep it simple and clear. Okay, simple doesn't mean ineffective or boring, it just means it's easy to follow so that the reader isn't confused. Once you've done your plan, you should spend 40, maybe 45 minutes writing. Okay, in the real thing, you're going to have 45 minutes in total, but it's important to make sure that you feel comfortable that you've written a full story. So spend 45 minutes writing your story. The focus in terms of the writing itself should be on your accuracy of spelling, punctuation and grammar, your use of varied and interesting vocabulary, but also words that make sense and that fit and that are easy to kind of follow, so they're not just put in there for the sake of using fancy words, but they're actually effective. And then lastly, sentence structure. So the length of your sentences, the punctuation used in sentences, the way you open sentences, that can all be part of sentence structure. So those are the skills that you should be focused on in the creative writing.